in the sun-bleached valleys of what was then Yugoslavia. The year was 1978. It was autumn, and the hills of Herzegovina were alive with the hum of harvest olive trees shimmering in the breeze, children laughing on dusty roads, and church bells echoing from distant parishes. Among those who waited in hope for new life were two young parents from a small town near Mostar, the Setka family. Their first child, a boy named Daniel, came into the world on the 21st of September, a healthy newborn, pink-cheeked and peaceful. For a brief moment, everything was perfect, but only 4 days later, that peace shattered. Daniel began to cry a cry that did not sound like the usual hunger of a baby. His small body stiffened, his lips turned blue, and his tiny hands trembled. Within hours, he was rushed to the hospital, where doctors whispered a word that sent a chill through his mother's heart. Septicemia, a blood infection, spreading fast. Machines hummed in sterile rooms, while nurses hurried around him. The days blurred into nights filled with prayer and fear. Sometimes he would fall silent, so still that his parents thought he was slipping away. Other times his fragile limbs jerked uncontrollably. One doctor shook his head and said softly, "You must prepare yourselves." Weeks passed. Daniel's condition worsened. The once healthy baby grew thin and rigid. He could no longer move or swallow properly. When his parents touched him, his skin was cold as marble. He could neither smile nor cry. He was alive, but it was as though life had been locked inside him. After a month of treatments and desperate hopes, the doctors in Mostar could do no more. They suggested transferring him to Germany, where specialists might attempt further therapies. For another long month, Daniel lay beneath the white lights of a foreign ward, while his mother prayed beside his crib, counting each breath. But even there, the answer was the same. There was no improvement and no known cure. When the family finally returned home, they were exhausted, spiritually broken, yet unwilling to surrender. Their neighbors pitied them. Friends came with words of comfort that sounded empty against the weight of despair. And yet, amid the grief, Daniel's mother clung to a single, stubborn belief: that her son's suffering was seen by heaven, even if no one on earth could understand it. Months turned into years. Daniel survived miraculously, some said, but he could neither speak nor walk. He spent his days in a wooden crib near the window, watching light move across the wall. His parents learned to read his eyes, a blink for yes, a quiet stare for no. Every morning his mother lifted him, whispered a prayer, and carried him outside so he could feel the wind and see the sky. In the quiet of those mornings, she would often ask the same question aloud: "Why, Lord? Why give him to me if only to watch him suffer?" No voice answered. Only the soft rustle of olive leaves, the passing of clouds, and the endless rhythm of faith and doubt. By 1981, Daniel was nearly 3 years old. The world around him was changing. Whispers of unrest filled the country. But in the small farming village of Medjugorje, something else was stirring, something no one could have predicted. Villagers began speaking of strange lights on the hill, of 6 young people who claimed to see the Blessed Virgin Mary. Each evening they gathered to pray, and each evening they said the same thing: "She comes to us as the Queen of Peace." News spread like wildfire. Pilgrims began to arrive on bicycles, on foot, in buses that shook through unpaved roads. They came seeking peace, answers, healing. Among them were the desperate, the sick, the curious, and those who simply wanted to believe that heaven still looked upon the earth. When Daniel's mother heard the stories, something stirred inside her heart. At first, she dismissed them. She had heard too many tales of false hope. But one evening, As she sat beside her sleeping son, she felt a quiet prompting, a thought that would not leave her. "Go, take him to the lady," she told her husband the next morning. He was weary, skeptical, but he saw in her eyes the same fire he had seen when Daniel was first born, the unbroken love of a mother who would walk any distance for her child. So they packed a small bag, wrapped Daniel in a blanket, and began their journey toward Medjugorje. They traveled through winding mountain roads, passing villages where people knelt in front of roadside crosses. Every mile felt like a prayer. The closer they came, the stronger the sense of something unseen pressing upon their hearts. When they finally reached the village, it was dusk. The sky glowed in pale gold above the church of St. James, and hundreds of people were already gathered outside, singing hymns and praying the rosary. Candles flickered like stars beneath the hills, and the air smelled of wax and wild herbs. The Setka family stood at the edge of the crowd, uncertain, holding their child, who could neither speak nor move. In that moment, surrounded by strangers and faith stronger than reason, they felt the faint stirring of hope that the same heaven which looked upon this village might also look upon their son. As night fell, Daniel's mother whispered into his ear, "My little one, if the lady is truly here, she will find you." And though the child gave no sign, she believed that somewhere deep inside, he heard her. They had heard of Medjugorje only through neighbors' rumors spoken in awe and disbelief. Some said the children there were lying. Others said the whole village glowed with something unearthly. But the Setkas had reached a place beyond doubt or cynicism. When medicine ends, the soul keeps searching. And above them, rising out of the valley, stood Apparition Hill. Rocky, steep, and already dotted with figures climbing toward its summit, rosaries in hand. At the base of the hill, the family parked and joined the line of pilgrims. No one spoke loudly. Even the wind seemed to hush as prayers rolled like waves through the crowd. Daniel's mother carried him against her shoulder. He was almost 3 now, small and silent, his eyes dull with fatigue. Every few steps, she had to stop to catch her breath. Together, they climbed toward the place where the visionaries had said the Virgin appeared. Higher and higher, they went until the valley below disappeared in haze. When they reached the plateau, the crowd was already gathered in a circle. The children, the 6 visionaries, stood together, their faces calm, eyes fixed on something no one else could see. It was June 29th, 1981, only the 5th day of the apparitions. The Setkas stood among the crowd, hearts pounding. Daniel's mother pressed his hand to her chest. She couldn't see what the visionaries saw, but something in the air felt different, charged, radiant, alive. A few minutes passed. Then one of the girls, later identified as Vika, known for her bright eyes and fearless honesty, turned toward the people below. Her voice trembled as she spoke. "The Blessed Mother says that Daniel's parents must believe firmly, and the boy will be healed." Gasps rippled through the gathering. Some fell to their knees, others began to cry. Daniel's mother felt her knees give way beneath her as she clutched him tighter. Could it be true? Could heaven truly see them? After all these years of silence, the apparition ended as suddenly as it began. The children lowered their eyes, blinking as though waking from a dream. When they were asked what they had seen, they said the lady had smiled a smile filled with peace. The Setkas returned to the village in silence. They did not shout or weep. They simply walked as if afraid to disturb the fragile grace of the moment. Back at their small lodging house, they laid Daniel on a wooden table while his mother prepared his medicine. And then something small, almost imperceptible, happened. The boy's hand twitched, then again. Then, with trembling fingers, he tapped the surface of the table once, twice and whispered in a hoarse, dry voice, "Mama, water." The cup fell from his mother's hand, spilling across the floor. For a moment she could only stare, unable to breathe. Her husband stood frozen in the doorway, tears already filling his eyes. Then they both fell to their knees, holding their son as though he had just been born again. Daniel drank, slowly, carefully. Then he looked at them with eyes that seemed brighter, aware. It was as if a light had been switched on inside his soul. That night, the family returned to St. James Church. They didn't tell anyone what had happened. They simply knelt before the altar, whispering prayers of gratitude. Outside, the crowds sang in the twilight, their voices mingling with the hum of cicadas and the rustle of olive branches. Medjugorje was alive with faith, messy, human, desperate faith, but faith nonetheless. In that moment, Daniel's mother understood what the lady's message truly meant. Belief was not about seeing, it was about surrendering. She had asked for a miracle and heaven had answered, not through thunder or fire, but through the smallest gesture. A child tapping on a table, asking for a drink of water. The next morning, Daniel moved his legs for the first time. Clumsy, uncertain movements, but movements nonetheless. He smiled, a real, radiant smile, and the sun streamed through the window, as if in blessing. The Setkas stayed in Medjugorje for several more days. They joined pilgrims climbing Apparition Hill again, this time carrying candles instead of despair. Everywhere they went, people asked about the boy, the one the blessed mother had spoken of. And when they saw him, alive and alert, they whispered prayers of thanksgiving. When the family finally returned home, their neighbors could hardly believe what they saw. Daniel could now sit up on his own. Within weeks, he was walking, slowly but surely. And before long, he was running, his laughter echoing through the same fields that once knew only the sound of his mother's weeping. What had happened on that hill would be told and retold among pilgrims for years. Some would call it a miracle, others coincidence. But for the Setkas, there was no debate. They had carried their son to the foot of the hill broken and brought him home whole. And somewhere in that small Croatian valley, the faith of a mother had met the mercy of heaven. Evening descended over Medjugorje like a curtain of gold. The mountains glowed with the last fire of the setting sun, and the fields shimmered in silence. Pilgrims gathered once more near Apparition Hill, some clutching rosaries worn smooth by tears, others holding candles that flickered in the rising wind. Among them, the Setka family stood quietly. Daniel sat in his mother's arms, his small head resting on her shoulder. He was awake, more awake than he had ever been. His eyes followed the movement of light on the horizon, and every now and then he smiled faintly, as if listening to something only he could hear. People whispered his name as they passed. "The little boy from Mostar," someone said softly. "They say the lady spoke of him." No one said miracle. Not yet. In Medjugorje, no one dared rush heaven. That night, the crowd swelled. Farmers came down from the hills, priests from distant parishes, mothers carrying sick children in blankets. The scent of wax and incense filled the air. There was no spectacle, no music, only prayer. Hundreds of voices murmuring the rosary together under a sky thick with stars. Then, suddenly, the 6 children, the visionaries, grew silent. Their eyes lifted as one, and the crowd hushed. You could hear the sound of the wind brushing through the grass, the heartbeat of the moment itself. The visionaries later said that Our Lady appeared above the rocks in a radiant glow of white and blue, her face serene, her gaze filled with mercy. In her hands, she held the infant Jesus, who looked upon the people with eyes of light. The Virgin's lips moved, but her voice, according to those nearest, was heard not by ears, but by hearts. she looked over the gathering and then toward the direction where the Setka family stood. Again, she spoke the words the visionaries would later repeat. Daniel's parents must believe firmly, and the boy will be healed. The moment the words were spoken, a warmth passed through the crowd, a wave of stillness and awe. Those who had come in doubt felt their hearts tremble. Those who had come in faith felt it deepen beyond measure. Daniel's mother could not see the light, but she felt it. It was as though the air itself was charged with a presence both gentle and overwhelming. She held her son tighter, whispering, "We believe, O Mother, we believe." In that stillness, Daniel stirred. He blinked, focused on his mother's face, and raised his hand to touch her cheek. His father gasped. The child's hand, once stiff and lifeless, moved freely. And then, as if guided by something unseen, Daniel looked upward, toward the darkening hill. His lips parted slightly, and he murmured something no one understood, just a few faint sounds, like syllables of light. The prayer continued. The rosary moved from the glorious to the joyful mysteries, and when it ended, there were tears in every eye. The visionaries turned toward the people again, radiant and trembling, their faces reflecting what they had seen. They described the Virgin smiling through tears, sorrow for the world, yet joy for those who had faith. When the pilgrims descended from the hill that night, many said they felt different. Some said the stars seemed closer. Others said the wind carried a fragrance of roses, though there were no flowers nearby. And though none could explain it, everyone knew something sacred had brushed against their lives. Down in the village, the Setkas returned to their small lodging house. The room was dimly lit by a single candle. Daniel lay on the bed, his eyes bright, his hands restless with new energy. His mother sang softly, the same lullaby she had sung when he was a newborn, and for the first time, he hummed along. She froze, covering her mouth in disbelief. Her husband stared at their child, as if seeing him for the first time. The melody continued fragile, broken, but real. And then Daniel laughed. It was a sound so pure, so unexpected, that both parents wept. It was the laughter of life rediscovered, the echo of heaven in a small, sunburned room. The next morning, Daniel's father carried him back to the church. The boy insisted on walking, but stumbled after 2 steps. So his father supported him gently. Every pilgrim who saw them smiled, and word spread quickly. The boy is healing. The lady has heard them. When the family knelt in front of the statue of the Queen of Peace, Daniel reached out his hand. He traced his small fingers over the cold white stone of Mary's feet. It was as if the gesture completed a circle that had begun with suffering and ended in grace. Later that day, a local priest visited their lodging. He listened as the parents told their story, quietly, reverently. He nodded, saying only, "What matters most is not that your son walks, but that your hearts do." He prayed with them and blessed the child. Before leaving, he looked at Daniel and said, "Run along, little one. Heaven has plans for you." And though the boy could only take a few steps, he did each one steadier than the last. That night, a soft rain fell over Medjugorje, washing the dust from the roads and cooling the stone of Apparition Hill. Candles burned in the windows, their flames reflected in puddles like stars fallen to earth. Somewhere in the distance, a child's laughter drifted through the open air, and the villagers, hearing it, smiled and said to one another, "The little boy who could not walk is walking. The little boy who could not speak is singing. Truly, heaven is near." No one dared call it a miracle, not yet, but for those who witnessed it, it didn't need a name. Because faith, once awakened, is its own kind of healing. The road home was long and winding. The Setka family left Medjugorje with little more than a suitcase, a rosary, and a heart full of awe. They had arrived carrying a child who could neither speak nor walk. They returned with a boy who had begun to do both. The drive back was quiet. Daniel sat between his parents in the back seat, his small hands gripping his mother's fingers. Every now and then, he would point to something through the window, a mountain, a tree, a cloud, and try to name it. His words came slowly, uncertainly, like someone relearning a forgotten language. But every sound was a miracle. When they crossed the bridge into their hometown, the afternoon sun caught the water below, scattering it into 1,000 points of light. It felt like a sign, as if heaven itself was reflecting joy back at them. Their neighbors were waiting when they arrived. They had heard the whispers carried from pilgrim to pilgrim of a boy healed by faith on a hill where heaven had touched the earth. At first, no one dared to believe it. But when they saw Daniel step out of the car, holding his mother's hand, the murmurs turned into gasps. The baker dropped his loaf of bread. A woman crossed herself 3 times. Children ran to see him, wide-eyed and speechless. And Daniel, shy but smiling, looked up at them all and said softly, "Hello." It was his first word spoken in public. For a moment, there was only silence, and then the sound of weeping. Not the weeping of sorrow, but of awe, of gratitude, of the kind that only faith can draw from the human heart. That evening, the local parish priest came to visit. He had known the family for years. He had baptized Daniel, prayed for him, and watched the slow heartbreak of his illness. Now, seeing the boy sitting upright, eyes bright and alert, he could hardly believe what he saw. He asked Daniel's mother what had happened. She told him everything from the hospital in Mostar to the hill in Medjugorje, to the voice of the visionary who spoke those words. Daniel's parents must believe firmly, and the boy will be healed. The priest listened in silence. When she finished, he said only, "Faith can move the mountains we carry inside." He anointed the boy and led the family in a short prayer of thanksgiving. Then he stepped outside, tears in his eyes, and looked up at the night sky. For the first time in years, he felt that heaven was nearer than he had ever dared imagine. In the days that followed, Daniel grew stronger. At first, he walked with help a hand on his mother's arm, a few steps across the courtyard. But with each passing day, his balance improved. His movements became surer, freer. He began to chase chickens through the garden, to laugh when they scattered. The neighbors watched from their windows, crossing themselves in wonder. His first full sentence came one afternoon while he was sitting outside, tracing shapes in the dust with a stick. His father was fixing a broken fence, the sound of hammering echoing through the yard. Daniel looked up suddenly and said, clear as day, "Papa, can I help?" The hammer fell from his father's hand. He turned, eyes wide, mouth trembling, unable to speak. For a moment, they simply stared at one another, a father and son meeting for the first time in language. They both began to laugh, and his father lifted him into his arms, spinning him around as the sun set behind them. The yard filled with golden light, and the sound of Daniel's laughter rose into the evening air, pure, unbroken, alive. Weeks turned into months, and Daniel's recovery continued. He began to attend church again, sitting in the front pew beside his parents. During Mass, he would look toward the statue of the Virgin Mary and smile, as though recognizing a familiar face. When people asked him what he remembered from that day on the hill, he would shake his head. "I don't know," he would say softly, but it felt warm. The priest wrote down the story in his parish records, noting the details as carefully as he could. He sent word to the local diocese, who responded with polite interest but no official comment. The church, cautious and wise, never rushed to label the miraculous. It was enough that the boy was healed. Over time, pilgrims began to visit the Setka home. They came from nearby villages, carrying sick children, rosaries, and photographs. They didn't come to see a spectacle, they came for hope. Daniel's mother would greet them at the door, offer them tea, and show them her son playing in the yard. Some would cry. Others would simply smile and whisper prayers. One woman, holding her own paralyzed child, asked Daniel's mother what she had done to deserve such grace. She smiled through tears and said, "Nothing. I only believed that my suffering was seen." By the end of that year, Daniel was running barefoot through the fields where his father worked. He had begun to learn songs and short prayers, repeating them over and over. He liked to stand outside at dusk, facing the hills of Medjugorje, as if waiting for something. Sometimes his mother would find him there, quiet and thoughtful, and she would ask what he was looking at. He would point toward the sky and say simply, "The light." Those who heard him say it felt a chill, not of fear, but of wonder. It was as if the child's words carried an echo of the mystery that had healed him, something too deep for explanation, too real for denial. And so, the story of little Daniel began to spread beyond their small town. Pilgrims who had been in Medjugorje during those first days spoke of him as the boy the Virgin mentioned. His name was whispered in prayer groups, retold in small chapels, and eventually recorded on Medjugorje.org, where it became one of the earliest and most beloved testimonies of grace. For the Setka family, life never returned to ordinary. Every laugh, every word, every step their son took was a reminder that faith is not an escape from suffering. It is the fire that burns within it. At night, when the village fell silent and the stars came out, Daniel's mother would kneel by his bedside. She no longer asked why. She only said thank you. That sometimes heaven answers through the hands of a child, and that miracles, when they come, rarely announce themselves with thunder. They arrive like light on a hillside, like a whisper in the dark, like the first word spoken by a little boy who should never have been able to speak at all. Years passed. Daniel grew. He learned to walk without fear, to run without stumbling. His laughter became a familiar sound in the village, his presence a living reminder of the power of hope. He was not famous, not a visionary, not a saint carved in marble, just a child who had once been silent and broken, now whole. And yet, everyone who met him felt that something of heaven clung to him still. His parents never forgot the promise. Daniel's parents must believe firmly, and the boy will be healed. They kept those words framed above their door, written in their own handwriting, a testament not only to their son's healing, but to what belief can awaken inside the human heart. Visitors would still come, pilgrims from every corner of the world. They came with questions, fears, sicknesses of body and spirit, and they always asked the same thing. How did it happen? Daniel's mother would smile and say softly, "It happened because God never stopped listening, and because we finally believed He was." Many years later, one of the Medjugorje visionaries was asked in an interview which story from those early days had touched her the most. Without hesitation, she said, "The healing of the little boy," because it showed us that the words of the Blessed Mother were not only beautiful, they were alive. The interviewer asked her if she still thought of Daniel. She nodded and said, "When I pray for sick children, I think of him. His laughter was the first miracle I ever heard." Today, the official church has not pronounced judgment on what happened. The Vatican continues to study Medjugorje carefully, patiently. Pilgrimages are permitted. Masses and confessions are encouraged. But the church remains silent about miracles and visions, leaving them in the space where faith and mystery intertwine. And maybe that is as it should be, because not every miracle needs a certificate. Some are meant to live quietly in the hearts of those who witnessed them. Some exist only to whisper to the world that God still moves among us, unseen but unmistakable. Pilgrims who climb Apparition Hill today sometimes carry photos of their loved ones' sons, daughters, parents, friends, people who are sick or lost, or waiting for light to return. They leave their prayers written on scraps of paper, tucked between the stones. When the wind passes over, it sounds almost like the turning of pages, like heaven reading them one by one. Among those stones, a few visitors still mention Daniel. They tell new pilgrims about the little boy who could not speak, but asked for water after the Virgin's words were spoken. They tell how his laughter once rang through the village like a bell. They tell it not as a legend, but as a memory of what faith can do when nothing else remains. For on that hill in 1981, among the stones and prayers and candles flickering in the night, a mother's cry reached the heart of God, and God answered in the voice of a child.